Waves by C. Don McCallum. Chapter 8. Dirt sprayed into the air as Mia pulled up the weeds. This work was kinder to her hands than picking up the rubble, and it was nice to have Ulsa's quiet smile nearby. They squinted at each other from time to time in the early morning sunlight. Jerlane hadn't come back. He really was gone. But missing him now wasn't any different for Mia than the loss she felt for all of the people whose names had been crossed off the list, the names that would forever go unanswered. Even though the silence that would forever follow their names hurt Mia's heart, somehow she knew they were all right. Nothing could hurt them any more. She was a lucky one because she could still feel, because she could look people in the eye from now on and know that she was doing the best she could, no matter what came her way. A breeze came through the wilderness where Jerlane used to sleep, and the leaves shook on the branches. Out of the corner of her eye, Mia could see Ulsa looking up, so she followed her line of vision. There was nothing unusual, just trees and fallen limbs. But the breeze seemed to fill Ulsa with something that looked like hope. The silent woman took a deep breath and smiled at her working hands. Mia did the same. The sight of her mother walking with Mensha toward the care tent drew her eyes away from her work for an instant, but not for long. They'd let the field go for so long that there was much work to do. She could only hope that others would see Ulsa and her working out there, unafraid, and follow suit. The village needed everyone's hands to do the work of keeping everyone alive. The rubble could wait. They had mouths to feed. Even though there was so much work to be done, Mia couldn't help wondering about the note that Perla left in the old storybook. Would she ever see it again? If she found it, is there anyone she could trust to tell her what it said? She would have to tell her mother, wouldn't she? Yes, of course she would. If she found it, she would show it to Ulsa first. But even if she could read it, would she even be able to tell her what it said? Mia shook her head, trying to free herself of the thoughts running through her head. Just focus on your hands, she told herself. Think about what needs to be done and do it. But the question persisted. Ulsa, Mia asked, can you talk? The air was still, and she took in a soil-scented breath. Without looking, she could almost feel the corners of Ulsa's mouth turn up. She looked at her. The quiet woman's eyes shined. She smiled at her friend and reached for another weed to pull. In an instant, the silence of the morning was lost. The sky seemed to shake, but Mia could feel it was the ground. The world sounded hungry, even though she'd eaten so recently. The world's hunger pangs waved up through her feet, and she remembered the look on Jerlane's face when he read Perla's note. Doubts entered her mind. If only she could have read the note for herself. Her eyes raced over the field, looking for any strange openings as she tried to keep her balance. Ulsa grabbed for her, and they stood together in the field, holding on to each other. Behind them tents fell, and they turned to see their makeshift village flattened in a second. For the first time in a long time, screams were heard in a quake. The rumbling wouldn't stop. Would the whole world crack open? Would today be the day they would all be swallowed? Mia felt her chest would burst open if the quaking didn't stop soon. She looked to the care tent. What must have been arms and legs thrashed against the canvas. Mia didn't care what cracks opened up before her now. She had to get to the care tent. Her mother was in there, and she couldn't lose her too. She didn't feel herself start running, but she saw the care tent get closer, even though it moved painfully slow. Scream, mother. Cry out my name. Moan or wail. Anything. Just let me know you're alive. Mia saw Ulsa's hands come from nowhere and start grabbing up the canvas. She did the same just as the world fell silent again. Mia wondered who had fallen into the mouth of the world. Had the mouth opened up under the care tent? Had it taken her mother away? Would she be the last in her family, in the village? They pulled back the fallen tent. Cole was much stronger the last time she'd seen him. Had that only been 3 days ago? The way he pushed against the canvas, he looked strong enough to work. But that was the only place moving. Mia looked across the tent and could see the still shapes of two bodies. She worked hard to keep up with Ulsa's fast hands. Instinctively, they moved as one body, pulling back the tent and fallen beams. Mensha lay quiet. Elsa's hands pulled back the old woman's eyelids. They were empty. She was dead. The world would be swallowing her tomorrow in the burial mounds to the south. Mia looked to the other unmoving form. Mother, she yelled. Can you hear me? Her hands ripped up the canvas. The heavy beams became light as air as she threw them to the side away from what could only be her mother. Her mother's dark hair shot out of the darkness as she uncovered her. Mia heard someone yelling behind her, someone running toward them, yelling something she didn't understand. Her heart was beating so hard that it was the only clear sound in the world. All she knew was that her mother wasn't moving. She pulled back her mother's eyelids like she had seen Ulsa do to Mencha. Her mother's eyes didn't have the same kind of stillness. Maybe she was alive. Mia put her face near her mother's as if she was going to kiss her on the mouth. A faint breath came from her mother's nose. She was alive. Yes, she was alive. The trees became real again. The ground, still, returned to where it belonged under her feet. The sky was back over her head, and the sun had returned. Finally, Mia realized who had been shouting. Tora stood over Seema and also worked at her side. Tora, all alone in the world, the lass had come to help. That was all she knew to do. Mia slipped back into her body and got busy helping the women building a stretcher. No words were needed. She knew where they would take her mother. They were going home to where the villagers were already raising the fallen tents. The field would have to wait. Mia stroked her mother's hair and tried not to listen to Tora's chattering. The flame flickered behind her in the center of their tent. She watched its dance on the canvas of the re-erected tent. Leaning in, she whispered into her mother's ear, I love you. She thought she saw her mother's eyes move, reacting to her words, but she knew it was probably just her own wishful thinking. Mia lay down next to her mother and played with her hair under the blankets. She'd never noticed how much it felt like Perla's hair before. The color was different, but Perla's hair probably would have faded had she been alive. Looking at the blankets rising and falling under her mother's breath, Mia could almost see Perla lying by her side sleeping. I love you, she whispered to Perla this time as much as to her mother. She said it to the fields. She said it to the crumbled village walls and the dead fountain. She said it to the tree and to the wolves in the wilderness. She said it to the river and the orchard, to all the villagers, even the ones she'd never known. She said it to everything that is. In a moment, Tora would put out the flame and they would rest. Mia was already dozing when the tent flap was gently pulled back. Ulsa stepped inside and nodded at Tora, who fell silent. Pushing up on her elbow, Mia looked at her new friend and smiled. But her smile faded when Ulsa extended her hand. Even in the shadow, she could see what Ulsa gave to Mia. The worn cover, the familiar scent. Ulsa was handing her the storybook. Reaching up, Mia took the book and looked lovingly into Ulsa's eyes. Her friend didn't need to say anything. Her eyes said it all. This is for you. Mia's eyes spoke back. Your secret is safe with me. Ulsa touched Seema's head, and as quickly as she came in, Ulsa nodded to the ladies, turned and left. Her wake of silence comforted Mia, and she was grateful for the visit as much as the gift she held in her hands. From her mother's pallet on the other side of the tent, Tora looked at her. Can you read a story? Tora asked. I don't know how to read, Mia said with regret, though she caressed the book. Oh, I thought maybe you knew how. Since Perla did, and your father, did your mother know how to read? She does, yes, Mia said with a slight smile that quieted Tora. Jerlaine could read, Tora said sadly. Mia knew Tora was lonely, so she looked into her eyes. She let Tora see that she loved her. She let her see that she missed him too. Without saying a word, Tora walked to the lamp and pinched out the flame. Mia kissed her mother again and lay back on the blankets. Holding the book up over her face, the pages fanned their sweet scent, and she breathed them in. From the ancient pages dropped a single sheet of paper. In the darkness, Mia couldn't see what it was. She grasped at it. The rough texture of it told her it wasn't a page unloosened from the old book. But it was familiar. Laying the book on her chest, she touched the paper. Perla's note. She couldn't see the letters. She wouldn't have understood them if she could have, but Mia ran her fingers over them just the same. She faced her mother and breathed into her ear the words she thought the note spoke. Don't be afraid of the mouth in the field or wherever it is. Love, love people, love their stories. Just love. That's the only thing that matters. Mia imagined her mother's smile and wondered if Tora heard her in the darkness. She lay down again next to her mother, inserting her sister's note, and pulled the storybook close to her. In all the world, there was nothing else but the feeling she had in her heart. She had everything she needed. In the darkness, Mia felt herself falling. She'd had this dream before the one where she's climbing the tree, and she slipped into an endless depth. But she usually didn't feel pain in this dream like she did now. She rolled in her bed and found her blankets gone, her mother gone. The tent walls, if that's what they were hard and cold like the blade of a knife. Mother, she screamed. Little pinpoints of light overhead were swallowed by two giant lips. The sky, the sky was gone. Mia felt dirt on the bottom of her feet. Dirt was scattered on the hard ground underneath her, and she shot up to standing. She knew the smell of the soil from the field. I've been swallowed. Help, she screamed, almost drowning out the sound of her bursting heart. Help. Mia listened to her voice fade through the world's throat. All she heard was the sound of her footsteps moving over the smooth metal surface. In the pitch black, she tentatively reached for something to hold onto. She expected a slimy tongue. She feared the great teeth she knew she would find, but all she found was more of the metal walls, smooth and cold. She shifted her feet, and the dirt from the field grinded on the floor. Mia ran her hands around the wall. It was rounded like a piece of fruit from the orchard. Then her hand hit emptiness. She felt around until she found that there was a wall extended out away from the little room. A tunnel? But where does it lead? Who put it here? None of this made any sense. Is this where the people had been going? Why had she come here? Where had they all gone? They must have walked, she decided. Mia was quiet for a moment, and her heart started to calm. This was no mouth. The first villagers must have come through this tunnel. Who knows why? Maybe when she got to the end of it, she'd find her answer. Mia listened for the sound of any movement from above. Hello? She called. Is there anyone there? Her voice echoed wildly. The tunnel seemed to stretch on for a long way. If this is what happened to the others, I'd better start walking. Pain shot up through her leg. She moved gingerly, trying to walk it off, and it helped. She didn't know what lay ahead or where she was, but for some reason her heart was calm, and she wasn't afraid. She knew she was safe. Nothing could hurt her anymore. She felt her way along the wall, and the storybook pushed against her under her belt. Even though she'd been sleeping, she'd thought to bring the book. What would the villagers think about that? What kind of sign would that be to them? She walked on. She thought she heard something, so she was still. Hello, she called. Isn't it possible that someone else might be down here? Jerlane, she yelled. He'd been the last to go missing. Maybe she'd find him in here. The walls echoed every sound she made. The sound of her own breath bounced back and tickled her ears. There was no other sound. Maybe this was the belly of the earth. Maybe she was walking on only to be devoured in the darkness. She ran her hand along the wall and could feel a turn in the tunnel. Was she going in circles? No, not unless it was an enormous circle. She felt like she was going straight for long periods of time. Maybe it was some kind of a maze. Mia stopped for a second. What if the tunnel is branching off when it curves like this? She walked back a few steps and put the book back under her belt. Stretching her arms out through the darkness, she reached for the opposite wall. She touched it and ran her hand back up the way she came until her hand shot off into space. She put her hand back on the wall and felt where it ended at a sharp point. There was another tunnel beside the one she had been heading down. Mia stood where the tunnel diverged. Which way should I go? She asked the vast, empty hallway. Her own voice was the only answer, but it didn't tell her what she needed to know. Even though it was dark, she closed her eyes. Then her feet started walking. She chose the path on the right. She didn't know where it would lead, but it couldn't be any worse than just standing there in the darkness with no food or water. Who knew how long it would take to get to the end of the tunnel, if there was an end to it? If her feet were moving, at least she felt like she was getting somewhere. She walked faster even though her body was sore from the fall and tired from the long hours in the tunnel. Her stomach growled. She pulled the book out again, let the pages fill the air with their scent. The pictures in the storybook were painted on her memory, and she saw them as she walked. She saw the repairman and imagined that she was following him with his bag on her shoulder. She imagined she was Simeon leaving her village behind. She saw a picture of the woman with a conch shell over her head. The words started coming. Her name was Lena, she said in spite of her parched throat. Her voice echoed off the hard, smooth walls, and the story poured itself out into the world, protecting her from anything that might be waiting for her. Unable to remember the exact words of the story, she told what she could. Lena looked out onto the waves of the great sea and said she saw a city under it. People gathered around her and listened to her talk with a singing voice about how they would all live there one day. There will be no need for anger, Lena said. All will be love and harmony. People will live in peace when we get there. Lena, the people gathered on the shore begged to know. Where is this place? How do we get there? Looking back to the sea, Lena felt the sun warming her. She looked into the water a long time. The people looked at each other. Would she ever answer their question, they wondered. Finally, Lena spoke. First, she said to the anxious crowd, we must build it. Everyone stood in silence and looked out onto the fluid horizon. They were so entranced by the majesty of the vast and mysterious sea, home of so many hidden worlds, that they didn't notice Lena walk into the waves. But they saw her raise the conch shell over her head that the sea had provided. A voice came from Lena's mouth, but it seemed to have another source. Work together, friends, the voice said, like the atoms of this shell. Lena pulled the shell to her lips and blew out a note of such great beauty that a ripple pushed out from the bottom of the vast sea. This great ripple spread to all the shores of the world and sent the music into the air to the stars. This pure and powerful sound quickened the hearts of all who were on the land and in the air. All the people saw the city of waves as clearly as Lena described it, and their hands became very busy for a long time. As Mia told the story, she hadn't heard the strange roar down the tunnel. But when she finished the story, that's all she heard. Her heart stopped as fast as her feet did. What is it? A wild animal? If so, she'd never heard anything like this before. Mia swallowed and tried to take a deep breath, but the air grew tight in her chest. Can I go back? Take a different path? Or will the other tunnel have something worse waiting for me there? She touched the book at her belly and thought of the stories inside. Whoever wrote these stories, whoever wrote down these words and painted these pictures, would they be afraid? Maybe they had come through this very tunnel to bring the people of her village this book so they could learn from it, so they could have someone to look to in times of trouble, so they could find strength. Maybe they had also carried with them a tiny tree to plant in a village square they would build. Mia thought of the note that Perla had written. The words meant nothing to her, but she knew more than ever what the note said. She was not going to be afraid. Her feet moved her forward, and she walked faster to the sound. Whatever it was out there, she was going to get it over with. She was going to meet it head on and without fear. That's what Simeon did. That's what the people who built the city of waves did. Mia imagined herself plunging to the bottom of the ocean, immersed in the beauty that Lena described. She would get there, and she would bring the storybook along to share with all the people she found there. The roar grew louder, and she saw something she never thought she would ever see again. A touch of gray coated the end of the tunnel. There was light. It was faint and didn't reveal much, but it was there. She walked faster, forgetting her pain and fatigue. She didn't need to hold the wall anymore to tell her which way to go. She could see it right in front of her, growing bigger by the second. The gray changed colors. Reds and oranges poured out as if someone had slashed open the wall in front of her. But it was the belly of the world that was bleeding. She knew what she was seeing. Sunrise, Mia thought, running down the tunnel. She was free in the fresh air. No walls encompassed her anymore. She was free, but she was still alone. Not knowing where else to go, she walked onto the roaring sound of the waves scrolling up the shore, just like the one in the picture book, and fell to her knees. It was true, but nothing in the storybook could have prepared her for this. Mia looked out and saw the biggest river she had ever imagined. Thank you for listening to Chapter 5 of Waves by C. Don McCallum. If you're enjoying this story, please consider sharing it with someone you know. And please like the video and subscribe to this channel to help others discover these stories.